All right. Well, let's get started. So my name is Victor Nasser, and I'm gonna be your professor for this semester for the biology course. So we're gonna start, doing a weekly lessons of all the chapters according to to what's on Blackboard. Um, I look forward to learning together this semester, and I had sent you guys an announcement just a couple or 3 hours ago that go over all the things that are required for the course and for what's to submit and what's required for like to be due by the end of this week. So this course is gonna run pretty fast, and it's got a lot of things that we need to cover. Anyways, so let's see here. I'm gonna start with the first chapter. So we're gonna talk about evolution, the themes of biology and scientific inquiry. That's the scientific method. If you guys have heard of that before. Um, let's see here. Bear with me a little bit. All right, so the first thing is, we want to talk about life in general, right? So when we say biology, the word bio means basically like life, and ology is the study. So the definition of biology is the study of life, and basically when we ask how can we actually define life, can we actually define life? You know, we really can't. Like we can actually like try to recognize what life is by what living things do. When we say living things, that means like anything that's a living organism. So it could be a plant, it could be a human, it could be a bacteria, anything that's living basically. All right. So just make sure that you're following along with me in the PowerPoint, and you can also follow along in the book. Also, the pages that I mentioned on the course schedule, they're the ones that correspond to the specific PowerPoint in this case. All right, so we're gonna start here with a little video that's gonna show you just some signs of life. Basically, it's an animated video. So I'm gonna basically stop talking, and then you can listen to the video, and then I'll continue after it's done. Okay?
While there is a tremendous diversity of life on Earth, all living things, bacteria, archaea, protists, fungi, plants, and animals, share common traits that are associated with life. No single definition applies to all forms of life, so instead of defining life, we can only characterize it. Most biologists agree that in general, the following statements characterize life. First, living things contain nucleic acids, proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. The nucleic acid DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is especially important because DNA molecules can be replicated, an ability that enables organisms to reproduce themselves. Second, living things are composed of cells. Cells are the smallest units of life. Some organisms have only a single cell, others are multicellular. Humans, for example, are composed of trillions of cells. Third, living things reproduce. Living things have ways of generating new individuals that carry some of the genetic material of the parents. Some organisms, such as bacteria, reproduce simply by making new and virtually exact copies of themselves. Fourth, living things use energy and raw materials. Through metabolic activities, organisms extract energy from various nutrients and transform it to do many kinds of work, allowing the organism to maintain life and grow. Fifth, living things respond. A snail, for example, detects the pressure of touch and responds by retracting into its shell. Sixth, living things maintain homeostasis. the relatively constant and self-correcting internal environment of a living organism. A snake remains cool by finding shade, a behavioral means of maintaining homeostasis. Animals also have physiological means to maintain homeostasis. For example, humans sweat to remain cool. 7. Populations of living things evolve and have adaptive traits. In a process called natural selection, members of a population possessing beneficial genetic traits will survive and reproduce better than members of the population that lack these traits. In the case of the giraffe, a classic explanation for the long neck is that it's an adaptive trait for eating leaves that other animals may not be able to reach. Another explanation, however, is that male giraffes with longer necks can win fights with males having shorter necks and thereby gain greater access to females.
Alrighty, so that was a short and like good video that shows the different signs of life that we were talking about. So I just want to give you a little summary in case you missed a few things from this video. So basically, signs of life of living things. Um, the first thing is that they contain nucleic acids. So that's basically the DNA. And what the DNA does is it carries, coding information for everything, for like, hair color, eye color, the height. So it codes for a lot of things for, all living organisms. The DNA also, once it's replicated, which we'll go over that later on, it allows the organism to reproduce. Okay. Um, besides nucleic acids, which is DNA, there's also proteins and carbohydrates and lipids. Okay, lipids like when we say lipids, we mean fats. Okay, so these make up the properties of living things. Okay, so the second characteristic of the signs of life is that they have cells. Right, cell is the smallest unit of life. Okay, you can have two kinds, a single cellular, right, or a multicellular. So us humans, we're multicellular, right? We have trillions of cells that make the bodies, and they function together to allow us to actually maintain ourselves. So a third sign would be reproduction, right? So in order for us to, maintain and continue and and have growth, right? We need to reproduce, right? We need to have offsprings, and that's how things go. Like, you know, especially true for animals as well. Okay. So a fourth thing would be the use of energy, right? Energy like could be from the sun, could be from the ground. When plants, uses the sun to produce energy. Okay. And then we humans or animals, we eat the plants and get energy from that. So a fifth thing would be that this organism, right, it would respond to stimuli such as the snail you saw in the video. So when we poke the snail, it basically like retracts in its shell. So that's a form that it's trying to get away from the stimuli. So a sixth sign would be to maintain homeostasis. All right. So homeostasis in general means to maintain neutrality or to like maintain itself in the word itself. So, for example, when we sweat, if we're working outside or we're working out in the gym or we're playing a sport, right? The body sweats, so excuse me. The body sweats to remain cool. If it doesn't sweat, then all the energy will stay inside. So that's a form to regulate body's temperature and to stay cool. So a seventh sign was that living things evolve through natural selection. So evolve means they change, okay? And natural selection is selects basically like uh, a better organisms, and have you heard of the survival of the fittest? So basically, like in the case of the giraffe, right? the ones that have longer necks can actually eat the leaves of the trees better, right? And they can survive better than the ones that with the shorter giraffe. And also in um, in mating competition, the ones with the longer neck obviously have more. They'll impress their mate better than the ones with the shorter neck. Okay, so let's move on, and you will understand this a little bit better. Okay, so this group of pictures is showing different things. It's kind of similar to what we talked about, but it's got different terms we can talk about a little bit more. So that would be energy processing, right? Um, so in energy processing, for example, like the case of this butterfly, right? So the butterfly basically gets its nectar from the flower you see here in the picture, right? And basically this chemical energy that's stored, the butterfly uses it to fly and do work. Okay, so that's called energy processing, right? It's using that energy that it got from the flower, and it's converting it into work. Another one would be order, right? You see how that flower is beautiful, and it's very like ordered and structured in a way like that's amazing. So that's another um, property of life, right? It's highly structured and ordered organism. Um, a third one would be evolutionary adaptation. So that's hard to see a little bit, but that's a seahorse. And so what's going on here is that this seahorse has adapted to its environment, and it's living now on corals, and it looks very similar to the coral. And it does that as a way to camouflage itself and to hide, to basically better survive where it's living. Okay. A fourth property of life would be regulation, and like we mentioned, right? The when we said about the when we talked about the sweat to remain cool. So in this case, this jackrabbit here has basically like blood vessels. You can see here in its long ears, and these blood vessels basically have a blood flow in them that regulates the body temperature of this animal, which is pretty cool. Okay. Another one would be reproduction, and we talked about that. Reproduction is very necessary for survival and for continuation. Okay, that's another property of life. And another one would be response to the environment. Again, response to the stimuli, right? Um, like we mentioned about the snail. And another one would be growth and development. So that's to maintain an organism's self. Okay. First they need to maintain themselves, develop, and then eventually reproduce. Okay. All right. So that's another video of a seahorse camouflage. I'm not gonna show this one for now. You guys can watch it, uh, on your own. So let's keep going. So give me one sec. All right. So the study of life basically reveals unifying themes, right? Um, Biology can be like extremely huge, right? It's a big subject that covers all aspects of life, right? But we will talk about today organization, under biology, information, energy and matter, interactions, right, between different organisms and different environments, and we'll talk about evolution. Okay. So, new properties basically emerge at successive levels of biological organization, right? So, basically, life and biology, right? There is small things. We can start with small things like molecules, like cells, right? To the molecular level, and we can basically um, if you will zoom out of this little by little, right? We can say that a molecule or a cell makes up an we can even like go from an organelle of a cell, then we can go to the actual cell, which we will see in a bit. Then several cells will make up what an organ, right? And many organs will make up an organism, and then many organisms will make up a community, and many communities will will basically make up a biome, and so on, right? We will cover this in a bit. So um, this is what when we say biological organization, right? It's a huge range, and this is what we mean by that, right? And so uh, taking basically complex systems and reducing them into simpler components is called reductionism, right? Like the name mentions it. So you're reducing a complex system, like the whole human body, for example. You're breaking it down into a simpler component to understand it better and study it better, and that's what we mean by reductionism. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Give me a second. Bear with me here. So I just want to give you an example, right? So like reductionism, a great example would be when scientists extract DNA, right, from cells, and they try to study basically like the DNA and the genome of that cell. That's what we mean, right? They reduced the whole organism and just took that DNA to be able to study it. Okay, exactly what we said. All right, so this is what I mean by organization, like I mentioned earlier, right? So these are the levels of biological organizations, and this is important, right? So you can see here like that the biosphere is probably the most complex, right? It contains all types of environments, all types of ecosystems and organisms all in one place, right? So, for example, that would be, let's say, the whole United States, okay? Or we can say specifically a little bit more. We can say like, the Midwest, okay? So that involves huge areas. Then we go on to say ecosystems. So ecosystems are basically, multiple ecosystems make up a biosphere. Okay, so and then from there we say a community, right? And the community basically contains, several organisms living together, right? And then we can say populations from there. Populations, right? We're talking about specific kind of organism, right? That live together. So like the example here, right? We can say that this is a population of, let's just call them blue flowers. Okay. So if a population of blue flowers is living with a population of red flowers, right? That would be what a community. I hope you're getting the point here. All right. So from populations, right? We can minimize that and say an organism is smaller than a population, right? So now we're looking at one specific blue flower, and that's what we call one organism. Okay. Inside that one organism, right, there are different organs. We have green leaves, we have the blue petals of the flowers, right? We have the root. So these are different organs that help this organism, right, to maintain itself and live and be called an organism, right? And so from there, uh, we can look at tissues, right? So we're looking at specifically when we say tissues, we focus, let's say, on the green leaves, right? We want to look at the cells there, okay? And then from the tissues, right, we can look at specific cells, as I mentioned. So cell is, remember, is the smallest unit of living things, okay? And then inside the cell, This is where we find what we find things like a nucleus, mitochondria, other types of organelles, right? This is what we mean by organelles. Inside the nucleus is where we find the DNA, and this is what codes for our for everything in our body, right? This is the genome of the body, okay? And uh, organelles become what molecules. So now we're talking about like very small molecular, microscopic molecular levels. All right, so this is a general organization of biological things. All right, so next we're gonna talk about emergent properties. So basically, like emergent properties are, when we basically go from a let's say a microscopic level of organization. So like we just talked about, right? When we go from molecules into an organelle into a cell, right? We're actually like what expanding the properties. So for instance, right, we can say that like the chlorophyll, right, which is a um, or the chloroplast. Sorry about that. Um, in a plant, right, they have chlorophylls and other chloroplast molecules, basically, right, inside the plant, right, and these basically allow specifically for photosynthesis to take place, right. And so when we basically move out of that, right, and we actually look at the actual plant, whole plant right now, where we say emergent property, we have more properties of the plant emerging, right? So we can study, the process of photosynthesis that way, okay? So these coordinated processes of photosynthesis, right, which involves the a chloroplast, okay, that basically requires a specific organization of molecules in the chloroplast to be able to um, go ahead and do the photosynthesis process. So photosynthesis, if you didn't know, means when the plant basically captures the sunlight and it captures carbon dioxide and it gives out basically um, energy um, and oxygen. Okay, so let's see here. This is an example that I put in the PowerPoint here, right? So basically, just to give you an idea, right? A functioning bicycle emerges only when all the necessary part connects in the correct way, right? So you can't have like a bicycle where the one wheel is up here and the second wheel is up here, right? It doesn't work like that, right? It needs to be in a certain way that will allow you to actually make it into a functional bicycle. Same thing with um, at the process of photosynthesis, for example. Okay, so let's look at this right now. So um, at each level of the biological hierarchy, right, we find a correlation between structure and function, right? So you always have to have uh, the what we call the anatomy, right, or the structure of what we're studying and a function of that structure. So that's the physiological aspect of that structure. Okay? So basically this is what I have here in the PowerPoint. So when we analyze the structure, right? So if we look, let's say, at a a beak of a bird, right? If you notice that a bird has like a long beak, right? You would start thinking like maybe that beak or that structure is necessary for that bird, right, to capture, maybe worms, right, from the ground, or maybe to eat from a flower. I don't depending on the bird, right? So that just means that you have to understand the relationship between what we see in the structure and what we can like tell as far as function from that structure. Okay, let's see here. Oh, here we go. So this is exactly what I mean, right? So in the case of these hummingbirds, right? Uh, you can see the long beaks, right? And these beaks basically allow them to eat from the flower, and look at their the wings. So their wings, when they're pretty cool, because when they try to eat from the flower, their wings actually rotate at the shoulder. So that would allow them to basically hover and kind of stay in their place and fly a little bit backward, then come back to the flower and keep eating from the flower, right, until they're satisfied. So that hovering property is actually explained by natural selection. Okay, so natural selection will give them the ability to hover, to be able to maintain themselves while they're picking the food out of this flower. Okay, so now from here we're gonna talk a little bit about the cell, uh, and I might have said a few of the things already, but we're gonna go into detail right now. So again, the cell is the smallest unit of organization that's required for life. Okay. Now, when we say the smallest, the extreme smallest would be the atom, but the smallest unit of life, right? So when we look at an actual cell, a cell by itself is living, right? So that's very important. All right. So the cell theory states that all organisms are made from cells. So as the sound of it, so living, it has to be alive, right? And organisms, right, is made out of different organs, okay? And these organs are made out of what? Trillions of cells, all right? So a cell is actually enclosed by a membrane, right? Um, and that membrane, which we will see a depiction of, that membrane that encompasses the cell, it regulates what's going in and out of the cell, basically, to be able to maintain itself, okay? Now, like I mentioned, there are um, different type of organisms, right? You can have prokaryotic organisms and you can have eukaryotic cells, okay? Prokaryotes are things like bacteria and archaea, okay? Um, Humans are considered eukaryotic, have eukaryotic cells, okay? Um, Animals are the same way, okay? Plants are the same way, and we will see what the difference is. So eukaryotic cell basically have membrane closed organelles. So just pay attention to this. Both of these, eukaryotic cell and a prokaryotic cell, have an actual membrane that closes the whole cell. Okay. The difference here is eukaryotic cells have membrane enclosed organelles. So the small organelles, such as a chloroplast, okay, or a mitochondria, or a uh, I can't think right now of it, but nucleus, for example, or a endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, all of these are enclosed by a membrane in a eukaryotic cell, right? Uh, and the largest of these organelles would be what? The nucleus. Why is that? Because it contains rDNA, which is the genome. Okay. Now prokaryotic cells on the other side they're just much simpler. So usually they don't have a nucleus at all. So what you will see is in a bit is that their DNA or their genetic information is just like flowing inside the cell. Okay, it doesn't have something enclosing it, and and they don't have membrane enclosed organelles either. Okay, so you will see that in a bit here. All right, so you're looking at what this is um, a eukaryotic cell. Okay, so you can see here the outside of it. Okay, and this is what we mean by membrane. And then inside the cell, we find different organelles. Okay, you can think about those dots. Okay, that are organelles. Okay, and around them on the outside, these are membrane that enclose the organelles. Inside that big circle is where the DNA is, and that big circle is technically the nucleus. Okay. Now, pay attention now on this side, on the corner right here. That's actually a prokaryotic cell. All right. So you can see the DNA, right, is like, you know, not uniform, like not organized, right, because it's not enclosed. Okay, it doesn't have a membrane that's enclosing it. And you can see that there are no organelles at all. But however, you can see that a prokaryotic cell will still have an outside membrane. Okay? Alright, so now we're going to talk about the DNA a little bit. Okay, so again, the DNA is what it contains the genetic information, right? It contains the genes that codes for everything in the body. Okay, so life's processes involve basically the expression of and transmission of genetic information. So when we say expression means, a certain gene that codes for something. Okay, the gene itself is coding, but the expression, so the gene, let's say, can code for hair color. So that when you see the hair color, right, that's the result of the expression, if that makes sense. Okay, so transmission of genetic information means you're transmitting. Okay, so in this situation would be like, it could be when the cell is dividing. It could be when uh, when organisms are reproducing, right? All of that is transmission. You're transmitting something. All right, so within the cells that we talked about earlier, structures are called chromosomes, right? Chromosomes are basically, um, you know, double helixes, right? That contain basically the genetic material in the form of DNA or deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay. All right. So I want to show you an example here of this depiction. So what you're looking at, that's a long cell right here on the left side, and a typical cell, right? A typical, because not all of them will do this, but we will talk about this as more later on. But a typical cell, like long cells, they will divide. So one cell, which is called a parental cell, it will divide eventually as part of its life, and basically becomes two of the same cell again. Okay, and so that's the way for cells to grow and divide again. So those two cells will become four cells eventually, and eight cells, and so on. They keep doubling. But what's important here is this division allows for the transmission of DNA, okay, from one cell to two cells that are basically identical. And this is done through DNA replication. Replication means you're copying and pasting the same exact DNA. Alright, so um, each chromosome basically contains a long DNA, as I mentioned, a molecule, deoxyribonucleic acid. Alright, and that basically contains hundreds and thousands of genes, and each gene basically is what code for something specific. Okay, and these are the units of inheritance. So when when organisms reproduce and offsprings inherit something, that's because of genes that have passed on to the offspring. Okay. Again, they encode for information for building the molecules synthesized within the cell. Those molecules could be like, for I'm not sure, like, it could be anything, right? Eye color, how tall you're gonna be, how smart you're gonna be, all of that. Okay. The genetic information encoded by the DNA directs the development of an organism, right? That's typical, right? It's telling basically the organism what to do and how to do it. And this is just a depiction of what happened right during reproduction of humans. So we have a typical sperm cell that contains that DNA we're talking about, right? That's made out of chromosomes inside the head of a sperm cell, and then this sperm cell basically will basically mate or pair up with an egg cell from a female, right? And then when this happens, basically fertilization happens, right, from the sperm, and then this combination, right, um, this will produce a new embryo, okay, that contains a combination of both DNAs together. All right, so the embryo cells basically will start dividing, and more cells and more cells. You have more cells, and then you have specialization that's happening, which will not go into that, of course, with this course. Um, that eventually develop into organs, and then organ systems, and eventually a human. Okay, so let's see here. Um, So the molecular structure of DNA accounts for its ability to store information, right? Each DNA molecule is made up of two long chains, right, and a double helix. As I mentioned before, it's basically two strands that twist like this, kind of like like cinnamon twists, right? That's how they look like, really. So that these things basically will link together, right, and using hydrogen bonds, and basically they contain different um, blockchains or bases, okay, and these bases are what we call nucleotides, right, and there are actually four nucleotides or bases in a DNA. So A, G, C, and T. Okay. I want you to know that basically A pairs with T normally, okay, and then G pairs with C normally, okay. And that's just the video. Also, you can see that on your own. It's regarding also like the DNA and the description of the double helix and all of that. Okay. All right. So of course, for many genes, you know, they code for a specific protein. To make that protein happen, you need that gene to code for it. All right. So before protein is produced, the DNA has to be transcribed into RNA first. We will cover that, afterwards. But RNA is like the middleman between a DNA and a protein. So we say DNA is transcribed into RNA, okay? And then RNA is translated. See, there's two different words here. Translated into a protein, okay? So gene expression is the process of converting information from gene to cellular product, right? So we have the gene, which is, think about this like a code, right? And gene expression is basically the result of that coding giving us a cellular product or function, all right? Or we can say physiology itself. All right, so life requires a transfer and transformation of energy and matter, right? So when we say that, we we're talking about, as I mentioned before. So in the case of, let's say, the plant, right? The plant uses the sun, right, to basically get the energy from the sun, and basically that allows the transformation of energy from one form to another, right? So you're converting a light energy, right, into a um, carbohydrate energy, because basically when that happened, the product of photosynthesis is actually sugar. Okay, so that's to allow the plant to maintain itself. Okay, so this is kind of saying the same thing I just said. So again, the sun basically is the light energy, right? And then it's going into a chemical or a chemical energy because it's transforming, right? Okay, and then basically what happened is when plants get eaten by an organism such as, let's say a giraffe, right? The giraffe eats the plant, and the giraffe basically maintains itself, okay, and lives because of the plant. All right. So if the plant wasn't there, then the giraffe can't eat. So in this case, the giraffe would be a consumer. All right. So the plant we call a producer, because the plant actually converted the sun's energy into another type of chemical energy. However, the consumer, like a giraffe, it didn't convert the energy. It just ate it, and so it fed on the plant. Okay, and that's basically showing you exactly the same thing. So light, it's converted into, the plant converts it into chemical energy, and then it gets eaten by an organism, right? And then that organism basically you know uses it for to live and do work. Okay. All right. So interactions within an organism, right? So interactions between components, right? Organs, tissues, cells, and molecules that make up living things are crucial, right, for their smooth operation, right? So this is pretty like self-explanatory, right? So you can't have many different organs that work against each other. They have to work together, right, with their own cells to basically allow the organism to do what it needs to do, right? The stomach, for example, cannot stop, digesting food. Otherwise, the intestines won't have anything, right? It won't be capable to absorb. So that's a specific example of that interaction, right? We want them to work together, otherwise we will have what? A malfunction. Okay? So this is basically what we just talked about right now. Okay? I want to mention that many biological processes basically can self-regulate, right, through a mechanism called feedback. So feedback basically, like, it's an automated type of response. You can have a positive feedback or a negative feedback, right? So a positive feedback, right, when a function is happening and the automated feedback is positive, the result of this on the physiology would be to do more of what was happening. So that's a positive. It's like more. I want more of this. Okay, and negative is basically a result that goes and basically stop the initial interaction. So that's called a negative feedback. Okay, an automated type of thing that stops the initial reaction from continuing to go on. let's look at some more examples, right? So in a feedback regulation, the output or product of a process basically regulates that very process. Exactly what I said. So we have you know, an input, right? Let me give you an example. Um, so during delivery of a baby, okay, there is basically like a bunch of signals from the brain that basically affect the the organs of a female, right, to basically deliver the baby. So when there is basically more of that feedback, which is what we say by positive feedback, right? Whereas more signal and there's more, you know, molecular signaling and you know, uh, a direct signal from the brain all the way down to the woman's organs, right, to basically deliver that baby. That's called basically a positive feedback. So the body actually produces more and more of those molecules. We're not going to go into detail in naming because that's a whole different thing. But I just wanted to give you an example. Um, that's a positive feedback. So the body is telling it's itself, hey, we want more of that. So actually, we can actually deliver the baby. Okay. So a negative feedback is when the product or the output of a process goes against the initial um, input. So it stops it from going further. Okay. All right. So this is a small animation of a negative feedback, just to help you understand a little bit.
This
So
simple animation
let me just put it on mute. So you can say that these B, C, and D and A, these are um, signals, okay, molecular signals, and you can see that they're holding on receptors of something, whatever that is, okay. You can see that when there's a lot of D, a lot of concentration of D, look what happened. D basically holds on onto the first one, the first green circle, whatever that is, right? And it basically blocks from the process from going forward anymore. Why? Because there's a high concentration of D, and that's the basically signal, if you will, that tells the whole process, hey, we need to stop right there and not continue further. All right, so in a positive feedback, right? Again, we get more of the signal as a result of positive feedback. Okay. And this is just showing kind of the same thing, but with Z this time, the letter Z. So when you have a high concentration of Z, and Z basically gets on a receptor of, but let's say we call this a green cell, right? It holds on onto it. You have more actually of the initial interaction going on because of that. So that's actually a positive feedback. I don't know what happened. All right, apologies about that. The PowerPoint somehow crashed. So I'm gonna try to continue where I left off. One sec. Okay, I think we are good to continue. All right, so we're gonna talk a little bit about the scientific method now. Okay, so we'll just define the basically science basically is the word itself means to know. Okay, The word inquiry, right, means basically when we search for information and explanation of natural phenomena. So we're inquiring, right, to know about something. So scientists, including biologists, right, use inquiry to make observations. So we inquire about something and we use our observations, which is what we see, okay, and what we can interpret, and we basically form logical hypotheses. And basically, after we form a hypothesis, we test it, okay, to see, hypothesis is like a kind of like you basically predict, right, based on what you see. So you hypothesize that, for example, you know, because a bird has a long beak, right, we hypothesize that it's gonna be able to um, absorb more food from a plant. That's basically a hypothesis. And basically, we will do testing, right, and more, and collect data and all of that, and basically draw a conclusion of the hypothesis, whether we accept the hypothesis or we reject it. All right. So let's see here. Okay, let's see. Let me zoom in a little bit. So basically, biology begins with careful observation, as I mentioned, right? The observations will reveal valuable information about what we're trying to look at, right, and what we're trying to study. Basically, biology can also rely on other published things from other biologists. So there's a website called NCBI, and this NCBI has a lot of published experiments and things that biologists have done, all over the world, and will give the biologists that are trying to do an actual some type of an experiment or observation ideas of um, that will contribute to their conclusions. All right. So let's see here. So recorded observations, right, are called data. Okay, so data is basically can be divided into two things. You can have a qualitative data, and or you can have a quantitative data. So qualitative comes from the word what? Quality. Okay, and when we measure qualitative data, right, we are basically measuring and recording descriptions. Okay, so what we're using our observations to record descriptions. So we can say that, for example, right, um, we can record a observation of a chimpanzee, right, or a monkey. We can record its behavior and try to basically you know form a hypothesis and study a certain thing using it. So the behavior is what a description. Okay. Quantitative means when we say quantity means what? A numerical measurement. So we can say that, for example, this chimpanzee has I don't know, uh, four offsprings, or we can talk about one chimpanzee. We can say like it's I don't know, um, 6 foot tall chimpanzee. I don't know how tall they are, but that's just an example, right? The numerical aspect of it is that. Another example would be like if you're studying, for example, a bunch of uh, flowers or trees, right? We can say there are seven red trees or seven red flowers. That's a quantitative data. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Inductive reasoning basically we're basically using observations and data analyses, right, along with generalizations reached by induction, right, uh, to form a fundamental of understanding of nature and draw hypotheses. Okay. So basically, we're deriving generalizations, right, or reasoning from a large number of specific observations. Okay. So now we're gonna define hypotheses. Hypotheses is what I explained earlier, right? An explanation based on observations. So you're using observations to form an assumption, right? Uh, that you can use that assumption to do a testable prediction. If you can't test that prediction, then you cannot really draw a conclusion and you cannot go on. So a hypothesis need to be able to be tested. Okay. So we test things by doing experiments. Okay. So an experiment is when a scientific test is being carried out under controlled conditions. So we can control what's going on in that experiment, and basically find out the result of the experiment and see if we can accept or reject a hypothesis based on that. And eventually, of course, draw a conclusion. All right, so that's just an example for you. So basically, let's say your desk lamp, you found out that it doesn't work, right? So you might ask, why doesn't the lamp work? You know, it could be many reasons, right? It could be that the bulb is not screwed in properly. It could be that the bulb is burned out. It could be that your electricity went out, maybe. Maybe there's a storm. So these are what they're called hypotheses. You're just basically, you saw that there's a problem there with the bulb, with the light that's not working, and you're basically using your observation and you're trying to predict why could this have happened. Okay. So both of these hypotheses are testable, right? So in the case of the number one, the bulb is not screwed in properly, you can try to screw it in properly and see if it works. If the bulb is burnt out for the second one, you can replace it and see if it's gonna work. Alright, if the electricity is out, then you can find out if other people around you have electricity or it's just you. Or you can test other lights in your house, okay? So again, this is basically what we talked about, right? And the result of that basically, if if um, if basically, let's say you predicted that reinstalling the bulb will fix the problem, yeah, right? And you tried to reinstall a bulb and that didn't basically work, that you didn't get light, that means what your hypothesis was rejected or not supported. However, if you replace the bulb, right, and the lamp works, what we say is the hypothesis is accepted or supported. Okay. Again, a hypothesis must be testable, right? We test it using what experiments? All right, we collect basically quantitative and qualitative data to be able to do so. So I wanted to mention that supernatural and religious explanation of things are outside the bounds of science. Okay, so for example, a hypothesis that goes full with the desk lamp, right? Something that you cannot see, cannot be tested. We can't know. We cannot know anything about that. All right. So the last thing I want to talk about is two things. So we have in a controlled experiment, right? That's under our control, right? An experimental group is basically compared with a control group. So what that means is we're basically trying to do an experiment on a group, right? And we're trying to do a comparison between the experimental group and the control group. Control group is basically the base group, okay, that we know information about, and we're trying to basically compare it to the experimental group. Okay. So I want to talk about variables too, right? Experimental variables, you have two of them. You have independent variables and you have dependent variables. So they sound kind of confusing, but they're not. So the dependent variable is basically dependent on the independent variable. Okay? So we can say that the independent variable is the one that is basically manipulated by researchers, while the dependent variable is the one predicted to be affected in response. Okay? It is affected because what it is dependent on whatever researchers are manipulating. So an example of that would be, you know, testing fertilizer types or brands on plant growth, right? So a different fertilizer type or brand would be what? The independent variable. So when researchers use that different brand or type on, let's say a experimental group of plants, right? That's actually manipulated by researchers, right? They're changing the type of fertilizers, and the result of that is basically the plant height. So if the plants are growing or not, that's the dependent variable. So the plant height is being dependent on the independent variable, which is the fertilizer in this case. Okay. And finally, we just want to define theory, right? Theory is basically a broader in scope than hypotheses. Theory is basically like when we theorize about, a, an idea. So, for example, you've heard about the Big Bang what theory, okay? So, general can lead to new testable hypotheses, and it is supported by large body of evidence in comparison to hypotheses. Okay. And that should be it for chapter one. Please make sure that you read the book as well, with all the specific pages that I had mentioned, and make sure that you do the specific homeworks as well as that's assigned for chapter one, using uh, the mastering, okay, on Pearson. And we basically I was able to put some links for you there that will take you directly there to be able to complete your homework and dynamic module. Okay, and if you score I think over 95 on them, then you won't have to take the adaptive um, assignment. Okay, that's all explained in the syllabus and on Blackboard. But if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to help you. Um, so yeah, I hope that we can learn together this semester more, and we will enjoy uh, our time learning for the rest of the semester. So see you in the next video. I'll probably be uploading this and then maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, hopefully. All right. See you a bit later.